are back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com and talking about child labor. And, this is always, of course, a very, easy issue for the politicians to demagogue. I mean, if I'm going to say, hey, I think we should get rid of child labor laws. Oh, yeah, Peter Schiff wants to exploit children. Peter Schiff wants children in sweatshops. Of course I don't want children to be in sweatshops. In fact, I don't know of any parent. In fact, if anybody wants to call the show who has a kid, young kids in elementary school, and let me know that the only thing stopping you from sending your kids off to a sweatshop is child labor laws. And if they eliminated the laws against child labor, that you would pull your kids out of elementary school and send them off to a sweatshop so you can earn an extra few bucks. I mean, there's no way that is going to happen. The reason that children aren't working now is because we're productive enough, we've advanced enough, we have machines and a higher standard of living that we don't need. Thankfully, we don't need our children to work. But in poor places around the world, and hundreds of years ago, before we had, capitalism, where you had tools and equipment and productivity, the reason that children worked is because that was the only way their parents could afford to support them. That was the only way they could put food on the table. And so it wasn't, it wasn't because the parents wanted to exploit them. It's they wanted to feed them. And so children had to work. But parents obviously cared about the conditions under which their kids worked. In fact, a lot of the kids that worked for their parents. I mean, a lot of the child labor was on a farm. But of course, as farmers became more productive, as we had machines and automation, farmers didn't have to rely on the labor of their children. They could rely on machines, and they can rely on paid help, and that enabled their children to do other things. And so it's wealth and capitalism that raises standards of living. That eliminates child labor. Hey, that's what eliminated women having to work outside the home. Of course, we've reversed a lot of that process. And again, I'm not being sexist. I've got no problem with women wanting to work outside the home because they find it enjoyable and fulfilling, and it's something they want to do. What my problem is there are many women today that would prefer to stay home and watch the kids, but they can't. They no longer have that option because their husband can't afford to support them. Now, why can't he? He can't because we're not as productive as we used to be, and taxes are a lot higher than they used to be. But what really is, a bad part about the people that are, child labor, we can't have child labor. Well, what if it really is a poor country? And what if the alternative is the child works or the child starves? Now, isn't it better to have a child working than starving to death? But somebody that's on, going to sit on their high horse and say, oh, child labor, that's terrible. Let's just pass a law in some of these poor countries and say your children can't work. Well, what is the alternative? So they die, they starve. So I trust parents. I think parents are going to make a better decision. I think parents care more about their own children than some faceless bureaucrat that never met them. Anyway, is my caller still there?
No, I appreciate that, Peter, because I agree with you. I just get a lot of my liberal friends always bring up that point, so I wanted to see your response. But
I would ask your liberal friend if they have children. If there were no child labor laws, would you send your children off to work? Would you pull them out of school and send them to work somewhere?
Right. No, it's a great point.
I mean, nobody would do that. I mean, the liberal thinks that everybody else is out to screw everybody, even their own children. That everybody they have such a low opinion of their fellow man that they figure without government protection, everybody would be exploited. All employers would exploit their workers. All parents would exploit their children, except, of course, them. Except, of course, the liberal do-gooder who feels he's the only one that's good, he's the only one that's moral, and everybody else is just greedy, and going to do all this, and so they have to step in and protect society.